Have you ever wondered if the words you speak are more than just expressions? That they're shaping the very fabric of your life in real time? That what you quietly whisper to yourself might be scripting the next chapter of your reality? Tonight, we're going to explore that possibility. Softly, slowly, without rushing, and discover what it means when identity becomes a frequency, not a memory. So wherever you're listening from, whether curled under blankets, resting, in a quiet room, or just letting your thoughts drift between breaths, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Subscribe so we can meet again, and let me know in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for? You right now? You've arrived at a calm moment in your timeline, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't random. In this gentle story, we'll drift into the unseen layers of your self-definition, uncover how your I am is not just a sentence but a signal, and explore how the universe listens not to what you want, but who you are being. Get comfortable, and prepare to remember something deep you may have always known. There is something strange about the way you speak to yourself when no one is listening. You think it's harmless. A sigh in the mirror, a passing thought, a quiet sentence muttered while stirring your tea. I'm tired. I'm unlucky. This always happens to me. But what if those words aren't just observations? What if they're instructions? Not to your body or your mind, but to something even deeper. To the very field of reality that surrounds you. What if every I am you declare becomes a signal, a broadcast, a tuning fork, and the quantum universe listens not like a parent or a judge, but like a mirror, reflecting back exactly the frequency you just declared? Most people speak without knowing they are scripting the structure of their own experience. They narrate their lives like documentaries, thinking they're reporting facts. But the truth is quieter and far more powerful. They are not narrators. They are composers, and the melody they compose begins with two words. I am. These words are not decorative. In the quantum world, they are not just grammar. They are frequencies, vibrational commands. When you say, I am, you collapse. Waves of possibility into form. This is not poetry. This is physics. The observer effect, one of the strangest principles of quantum mechanics, shows us that particles behave differently simply because they are being observed. They go from being waves, infinite possibilities, to particles, specific outcomes, just because someone is watching. And in your life, that watching is your self-perception. The moment you label yourself, even gently, even silently, you send a pulse through the field, and the field, ever faithful, begins to reorient itself around that pulse. You say, I am broken, and the probability patterns of reality begin reinforcing that truth. Not because it's true, but because it's consistent. The field doesn't prioritize your happiness. It prioritizes coherence. Here's the gentle tragedy. Most people don't realize they are broadcasting pain as identity. They think they're venting. But pain, when repeated with the prefix I am, becomes more than a feeling. It becomes architecture. The phrase I am stuck doesn't just describe a mood. It begins building walls around you. Invisible ones. Made of thought, yes, but also energy, frequency, and frequency has rules. Like attracts like, resonance stabilizes. That means your self-talk becomes your environment. And over time, it doesn't matter what you want. What matters is who you say you are, because that's the signal you're sending out. And the universe always tunes itself to the signal, not the request. There's an old teaching, passed down in different forms through ancient traditions. You'll find it in mystic texts and sacred chants, in the quiet instructions of spiritual masters. It's this. The name of the divine is I am that I am. At first glance, it sounds cryptic, like a circle with no beginning. But it's actually a frequency code. A declaration of identity not based on memory, but on being itself. The sacred state of presence. Not, I am what happened to me. Not, I am what I failed at. Just, I am. That alone, the act of being without apology or explanation, is power. And it's the most magnetic stance you can take in the field of creation. Because it contains no resistance. It contains no contradiction. But most people don't live there. They live in echo chambers of old declarations. Childhood labels, relationship wounds, past failures. I am not enough. I am always behind. I am too sensitive. These aren't just beliefs. They are energetic fingerprints, etched deep into the nervous system and broadcasted into the quantum field like quiet sirens. And the field listens, not like a parent granting wishes, but like a tuning fork, vibrating to match your tone. This is why your life keeps reflecting you back to yourself. Not because you deserve it, not because you're being punished, but because the field is obedient to coherence. And coherence is the key to unlocking everything. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be loud. You just have to become consistent in who you declare yourself to be. That means your thoughts, your feelings, your body language, your breath, all must begin humming in harmony. Not constantly, but intentionally. That's when the field starts rearranging. Because in coherence, reality becomes less random. Coincidences increase. Synchronicities appear. Conversations change. People begin responding to you differently. Not because you're saying different things, but because you are becoming someone else. Not someone fake, someone remembered. Someone real. This is what some mystics call the God state. But it's not about religion. It's not about power in the worldly sense. It's about alignment. A vibrational posture that says, I know who I am, and I will not contradict it. The God state is not achieved through striving. It's achieved through embodiment. And embodiment is not performance. It's resonance. Feeling your identity in your breath, in your steps, in the quiet choices no one sees. When you walk as the version of yourself you've declared, even before the evidence shows up, you enter the field as a signal, not a request. And the field can't help but respond. But let's pause for a moment, because none of this is about forcing yourself to feel happy all the time. That's not alignment. That's repression. Real coherence includes your pain. It includes your shadows. It includes the soft tremble in your chest when you're trying to believe something new. The key is not to avoid doubt. It's to stop identifying with it. You can feel fear and still say, I am becoming brave. You can feel small and still say, I am expanding. The trick is in the phrasing. When your body resists a bold declaration, don't lie to yourself. Bridge the gap. Say, I'm learning to feel worthy. Say, I'm discovering what abundance feels like. These statements are believable, and believability is what allows the nervous system to relax into new identity. You can't create resonance through force. You create it through safety. The body must feel safe to change. This is why affirmations often fail. If the statement feels like a threat to your nervous system, it will reject it, even if it's positive. That's not sabotage. That's protection. So we must work gently, not with shouting, but with whispering. Practices like breathwork, slow visualization, embodied stillness, these are not luxuries. They are technology. They help the body memorize new emotions. And once the emotion is real in your system, the identity becomes stable. The field feels the shift and responds accordingly. You are not trying to trick the universe. You are teaching your frequency how to sing a different song. And over time, that song becomes a home. Imagine for a moment that every belief you hold about yourself emits a soft, invisible tone, like a radio station quietly broadcasting it. the background of your life. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. And now imagine that everything in your external world, people, opportunities, obstacles, timing, is tuning in to that station. Not because it's true, but because it's coherent. That's how resonance works. The universe doesn't check your worth. It checks your signal. It doesn't respond to your effort. It responds to your alignment. And alignment begins where language meets embodiment. Not when you say, I am, as a performance, but when your body, your breath, your nervous system, your cells, all begin to hum the same note. You see, the quantum field, that invisible web of energy and possibility that surrounds everything, isn't organized by logic. It's organized by frequency, which means your job isn't to prove yourself. It's to tune yourself. When you shift how you feel about who you are, you shift your access point in the field. And that shift, though invisible, changes everything. Suddenly, things that once felt unreachable feel inevitable. Not because the world became easier, but because your signal became clearer. That's the quiet miracle most people miss. Reality doesn't change when you figure things out. It changes when you become a version of you for whom a new reality already makes sense. There's a strange paradox here. You are both the signal and the receiver. You are both the voice and the echo. And once you understand this, everything softens. You stop blaming the world for your delay. You stop chasing things that don't match your frequency. And instead, you begin a different kind of work. Not outer work, inner calibration. You begin speaking not from panic, but from remembrance. You say, I am no longer performing worthiness. I am remembering that I always was. And that remembrance is not conceptual. It's vibrational. It's the way your breath slows when you speak truth. It's the way your shoulders drop when you stop trying to earn what you already are. And still, most people live in a loop. A loop where their words contradict their desires. They say, I am abundant, but they feel scarcity gnawing at their belly. They say, I am love, but their body flinches at intimacy. This contradiction, this inner static, is not failure. It's feedback. It means the nervous system doesn't feel safe yet, and that's okay. The goal is not to override it. The goal is to rewire it, slowly, gently, through repetition, safety, and presence. When the body believes you, the field responds, not before. This is why most transformation doesn't begin with outer action. It begins with frequency integrity, the moment your body, mind, and energy agree on who you are. Let's look at it another way. Every time you speak a new identity, I am healing, I am open, I am safe to be seen, you're sending a signal into the future. That signal moves faster than form. It reaches outcomes before you do. And it begins rearranging people, moments, even timelines to align with your new self-definition. But only if the signal is stable. That's why momentary motivation rarely works. You can say the right thing once, but if you return to the old frequency the next day, the field reverts. Not out of punishment, but out of coherence. The field listens to consistency, not bursts. This is why embodiment matters more than intensity. A single whisper repeated daily becomes more powerful than 1,000 shouted declarations you don't believe. You are not manifesting from thought alone. You are manifesting from vibration. And vibration is felt not only by the field, but by others. This is why someone who walks into a room with quiet confidence is instantly magnetic. Not because they're trying, but because their energy is congruent. They don't need to announce who they are. They simply are. Their frequency does the speaking. And that frequency is always the result of internal coherence, the quiet agreement between thought, feeling, and identity. When those three align, you become unforgettable. Not to impress, but to embody. And this brings us to an even softer truth, one many people resist. The greatest shifts in your life don't happen when you force things to move. They happen when you stop trying to prove and start choosing. Choosing to believe in a version of yourself that your past doesn't recognize. Choosing to speak from the future instead of from memory. Choosing to let your I am be a declaration of design, not of default. And most of all, choosing to stay with the discomfort of change long enough for your nervous system to adapt. That discomfort is not a problem. It's a portal. Think of it like a frequency threshold. As you rise into a new identity, one that feels truer, freer, more aligned, your old frequency will resist, not because you're wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. The body fears unfamiliarity more than pain. And so you'll be tempted to retreat, to say, maybe I'm not ready, to declare, this isn't working. But what you're really saying is, I haven't stabilized the new signal yet. And that's okay. All it means is, keep going, keep breathing, keep declaring gently, and let your body catch up. This is how you cross the threshold, not by force, but by presence. Presence is the secret amplifier of identity. When you speak from presence, the field feels it, because presence is pure signal. It carries no contradiction. It carries no residue. And it doesn't need evidence. It is the frequency of trust. Not blind trust in outcomes, but deep trust in your own signal. The kind that says, I don't need to chase what is already seeking me. That's the God state. Not superiority, not perfection, but alignment so clean that even silence becomes a prayer. When you live here, even briefly, everything feels different. Your choices soften, your boundaries sharpen. You stop reacting to old triggers, not because they disappear, but because you're no longer resonating with them. They can't find a foothold, because your signal has changed. And in that change, the world responds without needing instruction. Doors open, people shift, time bends, and you're not surprised because it doesn't feel like magic. It feels like resonance finally catching up, and this is what's most powerful of all. You don't need to wait for the world to recognize it. You don't need applause. You don't even need immediate results, because the moment you begin living from your new I am, you already are the result. The outcome is not proof. The embodiment is. And when you know this, you stop trying to convince anyone. You stop asking permission to be who you are. And you start transmitting it calmly, clearly, consistently. That's the shift that changes timelines, not intensity, not willpower, resonance. Let's explore something tender now. Not mystical, not dramatic, just quietly real. Most of your current life isn't a reflection of who you truly are. It's a reflection of who you've repeatedly said you are. And if that repetition has been unconscious, shaped by wounds, roles, or fear, then it makes sense that your external world might feel like a stranger's house. This isn't because you're broken. It's because the field has been responding faithfully to an old transmission. The good news? You can retune it, not by fighting the old story, but by replacing the signal. Your reality is not arguing with you, it's obeying you. And it's never too late to whisper a new I am into its waiting silence. But this time, let it be different. Let it come from gentleness, not ambition. Let it emerge, not because you're trying to escape your past, but because you're finally ready to remember your future. Because the future isn't a destination, it's a frequency. And when you match that frequency, even just a little, it begins sending signals back, invitations, alignments, unexpected ease. You felt glimpses of it before, those strange days when everything just clicked. When someone reached out at the right time, when a delay turned out to be a protection. That wasn't coincidence. That was coherence peeking through the Fog. Most people don't notice those moments. They dismiss them. Or worse, they try to replicate them mechanically, thinking if they do everything the same way again, they'll manifest the same outcome. But the field doesn't respond to formulas. It responds to frequency. And frequency is alive. It's relational. It's not the words you speak. It's the energy underneath them, the embodiment behind them. And that means even when your lips say, I am ready, if your breath says, I'm terrified, the field listens to the breath. This isn't cruel. It's precise. It means you don't have to perform your way into miracles. You simply have to align, breath by breath, belief by belief, choice by quiet choice. And yes, it takes patience. It takes presence. Because coherence isn't built in a single moment of insight, it's built in the spaces in between. In the way you get dressed in the morning, in the words you choose when you speak about your life, in the way you treat your body when no one is watching. Every choice either confirms your new identity or drags you back into the gravity of the old one. And the old identity, remember, will not go quietly. It will whisper to you. It will say, that's not like you. It will try to convince you that discomfort means danger. But that's not truth. That's just programming. Old static trying to survive. You are not obligated to repeat yourself. You are not bound by your history. You are not sentenced to echo the stories your ancestors didn't know how to change. The moment you become aware that identity is a signal, you become free to reauthor your transmission. Not because you deserve it more than others, but because you finally realize the signal is yours. It always has been. It was just hijacked by fear. And fear, for all its noise, has no frequency of its own. It only lives in borrowed resonance. But your true signal, the one beneath the conditioning, beneath the scarcity, beneath the shame, that signal is unmistakable. It doesn't shout. It hums. You felt it in quiet moments when you weren't trying, when you laughed without rehearsing, when you helped someone without needing thanks, when you looked in the mirror and even for a split second saw yourself without the story. That was coherence. That was the frequency of the real I am. And when you feel it, everything else starts falling away. Not instantly, but gently, like sand sliding off your shoulders. Now, let's talk about something even subtler. The field not only reflects who you are, it amplifies it. This means that even a small shift in identity, held consistently, can ripple outward in ways you can't predict. A change in posture becomes a new kind of conversation. A moment of forgiveness becomes a pattern breaker for your entire lineage. A single, I am choosing peace, if felt fully, can reorganize your nervous system and call in a new level of opportunity. Not because it's magic, but because coherence is contagious. And when you embody it, reality adapts. But embodiment doesn't mean you never wobble. It doesn't mean you never question. It means you return, again and again, to the stillness, to the frequency, to the home inside your own breath. You stop trying to prove your worth with effort. You stop trying to manipulate outcomes with noise. And instead, you become quiet enough to hear the subtle guidance that has always been there. The part of you that doesn't chase, doesn't strive, doesn't explain. The part that knows. This is the shift from manifesting to magnetizing, from doing to being, from requesting to remembering. And once this shift begins, you'll notice something unexpected. People will start treating you differently, not because they've changed, but because you have. Your relationships recalibrate. Some drift away gently, others deepen. Opportunities you once begged for now appear without force. Not because you've earned them, but because you've become the version of you that belongs in that reality. And reality, again, responds not to want, but to resonance. It's strange how ordinary this feels. You expected thunder, fireworks, something dramatic, but it arrives quietly, like a breath, like a yes you didn't have to earn, like coming home after a long journey and realizing the door was never locked. Because it's not about achieving a new state, it's about remembering a state you never lost. The God state isn't a throne. It's a frequency, a sacred ordinariness, a deep cellular knowing that says, I don't need to wait. I am already. From here, everything softens. You stop trying to explain yourself to people who haven't met this version of you. You stop translating your frequency for those tuned to static. You stop leaking energy into proving. Instead, you pour your presence into being, into walking, into the way you cook your food, into the way you speak your name. This is coherence, not as a goal, but as a lifestyle. And when life pushes, as it sometimes will, you no longer collapse. You pause, you breathe, you return. Because your identity is no longer negotiable, not because you're stubborn, but because you're clear. You've made a home in your frequency. And from that home, you create, not outcomes, realities, not hope. Embodiment, not noise. Signal. There's something quietly revolutionary about deciding, in a world that keeps shouting at you to be more, that you are already enough. Not as a mantra, but as a vibration. Not as a borrowed quote, but as a breath you keep returning to. Most of what we call self-improvement is actually self-negotiation, a constant attempt to become acceptable to an identity we never questioned. But the truth is, your worth was never missing. It was just buried under noise. And now, in this soft place, this still moment, you're beginning to hear the difference between the voice that demands change and the frequency that remembers wholeness. It's subtle, but unmistakable. One feels like pressure. The other feels like coming home. And if you felt it, even briefly, then you already know. The field doesn't wait for perfection. It responds to coherence. That's why you can still feel afraid and be aligned. You can still doubt and transmit truth. Because coherence is not about being without shadow. It's about not fighting your light. It's about letting your I am be wide enough to hold contradictions without collapsing under them. You can be in progress and in presence. You can be healing and whole. These aren't opposites. They are frequencies harmonizing within a single signal. You. And now, a deeper question arises, not from the mind, but from the soul. Who am I when I stop negotiating my frequency with the world around me? Who am I when I stop adjusting my signal just to avoid rejection or disappointment? Most people have never met themselves outside the echoes of fear. Their identity is a reaction, not a creation. But when you begin tuning your I am from within, without apology, without theatrics, something ancient reawakens. A sacred memory, a signal that existed before your name, before your habits, before your disappointments. It doesn't ask for proof. It offers presence. It doesn't argue. It resonates. And this resonance, soft, sovereign, clear, begins to spread. You find yourself needing less validation, less explanation. You speak less, but everything you say carries more weight. You begin choosing differently, not out of lack, but from awareness. You don't reach for what doesn't align. You don't beg to be understood, because you've shifted your source of truth. It's no longer external. It's embodied. And once truth is felt in the body, it becomes magnetic, not because it manipulates, but because it emits clarity. Clarity is rare. In a world of constant reactivity, clarity is power, quiet power, the kind that moves rooms without raising its voice, the kind that says, I don't chase timelines, I attune to them, the kind that doesn't need to win arguments because it's not negotiating identity anymore. It's transmitting. This is the gentle secret of people who appear to manifest with ease. They're not lucky. They're just broadcasting from clarity. Their signal is strong, not because it's perfect, but because it's consistent. Consistency is the rhythm of coherence. And rhythm is how you build a new reality. Every morning, you wake up with a chance to broadcast something new. Not perform it, not fake it, but become it. Through action, yes, but also through breath, through stillness, through the refusal to speak ill of yourself, even in jest, through the micro decisions that say, I remember who I am, even if no one else does yet, even if the evidence hasn't arrived, even if the room is still full of old frequencies asking you to shrink. You don't shrink anymore. You breathe deeper. You walk slower. You speak cleaner because you're not rushing to get there. You're already becoming. And if the old you knocks, which it will, you no longer fight it. You simply say, thank you for what you are protecting, but we are moving in a new direction now. That voice, the one that said you had to hustle for love, perform for belonging, apologize for your dreams, it gets quieter. Not because it's silenced, but because it's finally seen. And when fear is seen without being obeyed, it dissolves into space, space where a new identity can breathe. This is how you build the nervous system of the future self, not by erasing the past, but by no longer worshiping it. You are not who you were, and you're not who you will be. But you are a frequency in motion, a living signal. And that signal is stabilizing. It might wobble. It might dip. But each time you return, the return gets easier. The old static loses its grip. The old timeline loses its gravity. Because the future self isn't waiting for you at some final destination. It's whispering now, in every breath where you say, I choose again. In every moment where you respond with presence instead of panic. In every breath where you say, this time I remember. And that remembering becomes the new baseline, the new song, the frequency others start to recognize. Even if they don't have words for it, they'll feel it in your posture, in your gaze, in your stillness. They'll say, there's something different about you, and you won't need to explain. Because the truth is, there is something different. Not on the surface, but in the source. You've stopped outsourcing your identity. You've stopped adjusting your signal to be more palatable. You've stopped dimming your frequency to fit rooms you were never meant to stay in. And now, the field is shifting. Quietly, unmistakably. You're becoming the version of you who doesn't have to beg for alignment, because you are alignment. You're becoming the version of you who stops chasing outcomes and starts sculpting the conditions within which those outcomes naturally arise. Not because you've mastered a technique, but because you've stabilized a signal. You've become the home frequency for a new reality. And here's what no one tells you about. That new reality? It's not louder. It's quieter. It doesn't feel like an achievement. It feels like peace. It feels like walking into a room and not needing anything to prove your presence. It feels like choosing solitude over performance, stillness over strategy, coherence over convenience. And that's not always easy, but it's always true. And in this truth, the universe bends. It reshapes timelines. It rearranges what you thought was fixed. Not because it's rewarding you, but because it's recognizing you. Recognizing the version of you that no longer negotiates worthiness. The version of you that no longer asks the past for permission to move forward. The version of you that simply breathes and transmits and becomes dot. So if you've been waiting for clarity, for readiness, for something outside of you to grant access, let this be your invitation. The doorway isn't out there. It's here, in your breath. In your now. In the next I am you dare to speak. Not as a wish, not as a hope, but as a signal. A quiet declaration that says, "This is who I am now, and I will speak it, live it, breathe it, until the field recognizes me." And it will, because it always does. There is a moment in every journey of becoming when words begin to feel unnecessary. Not because you've run out of things to say, but because your energy starts saying them more clearly. You no longer need to declare, "I am powerful," because the way you walk into a room says it before you speak. You no longer need to argue for your transformation, because your presence vibrates with proof. This is when the shift becomes permanent, not loud, not announced, but lived. Not because you've finally become something, but because you've stopped leaking energy into proving what already lives inside you. You've stopped asking the world to echo back your worth. You've stopped seeking confirmation from mirrors that can only reflect your old frequency. You've stopped dressing your identity in the robes of external approval. And in that surrender, something beautiful has happened. You've remembered the still power of choosing yourself, fully, gently, again and again. That's what coherence really is. Not just alignment of thought and feeling, but loyalty to self without drama. Quiet cellular loyalty. One that doesn't break under delay. One that doesn't fracture under doubt. One that says, "I am the root frequency of my life, and everything else is simply tuning in." And still, life will test this. Not maliciously, but faithfully. A field wants to know, not through words, but through frequency, if your signal is stable. It will send echoes of your old self, old timelines dressed in new clothes, familiar patterns disguised as new invitations. And it will wait. Will you answer from memory or from embodiment? Will you collapse into reflex or respond from resonance? This is the sacred edge where your signal is refined, not to punish you, but to polish you, to help you tune your frequency so precisely that the field has no choice but to reorganize around you. And this reorganization may look like endings, like silence, like pauses that feel like punishment. But these are not absences. They are space being made for a frequency that was once too big to fit in your old timeline. Do not fill the space with panic. Fill it with presence. The silence is not empty. It is sacred compression. It is reality reshaping itself to fit the version of you that no longer negotiates their becoming. And that version of you, the one who breathes deeper, speaks slower, listens more, is the signal. Not a persona, not a projection, a vibration. That's the quiet evolution you've been practicing. Not just changing thoughts, but changing tone. Not just adjusting mindset, but adjusting magnetic field. You've stopped declaring identity from urgency and started transmitting identity from sovereignty. You've learned to anchor into the version of you that doesn't flinch when things slow down, that doesn't spiral when feedback is quiet, that doesn't beg for miracles because it has become one, not as a metaphor, but as an actual electromagnetic alignment. Now you understand why the I am matters so much, not because of what it attracts, but because of what it stabilizes. It's not just a creative statement, it's a frequency lock. When you say, "I am abundant," you're not asking the universe to deliver something. You're asking your body to remember what safety feels like in the presence of possibility. You're asking your subconscious to stop equating expansion with danger. You're teaching your cells how to stay open without clenching. This is what we mean by embodiment. Not visualizing while dissociating, but breathing while receiving. And receiving, true receiving, requires self-trust. That's what most people skip. They try to receive from a place of self-doubt, thinking the blessing will build their belief. But the quantum field doesn't work that way. It mirrors the belief, not the hope. It reflects the vibration, not the wish. That's why self-trust is not optional. It's the transmitter. The clearer your self-trust, the faster the field responds. Not because the universe is holding score, but because frequency coherence has no static to delay the match. Let's pause here, gently, and look at something deeply human. You didn't always trust yourself, not because you were flawed, but because you were taught to trust others before tuning in to your own signal. You were taught to match the room instead of stabilize your own frequency. You were taught that coherence was selfish, that harmony meant keeping the peace at the cost of your own voice. And so, your signal became fragmented. You said what others wanted to hear. You suppressed what didn't feel safe to speak. You echoed what would keep you loved, or at least accepted. But now you know. That was survival, not coherence. Coherence is not the absence of conflict. It's the refusal to abandon yourself in its presence. And now, your nervous system is beginning to learn this. Not instantly, but gradually. Every time you choose to pause instead of react, every time you speak from groundedness instead of approval-seeking, every time you stay with your truth, even when it trembles, you are upgrading the frequency your life is built on. You are sending a new signal, one that doesn't just attract aligned experiences, but repels misalignment with grace. You are no longer magnetizing from need. You are magnetizing from knowing, and that knowing is starting to touch everything. The way you write, the way you rest, the way you say no, the way you say yes without explanation, the way you move through the world like someone who trusts time, not because it's predictable, but because you are coherent enough to remain yourself through any tempo. This is frequency mastery, not control, not perfection, but consistency without collapse. You may start noticing something else now. Synchronicity becoming natural. People calling at the right time. Ideas flowing during rest. A softness in your schedule that once felt impossible. This is not coincidence. It's the external world harmonizing with your inner resonance. The field has heard you, not because you forced it to, but because you finally stopped shouting over your own signal. You let silence become your tuning chamber. You let stillness become your amplifier. And now, everything that matches that silence begins to appear. No need to chase. No need to explain. No need to convince. Just breathe. Just hold the signal. Just walk like someone who knows their future is listening, because it is. You are not waiting anymore. You are no longer asking reality to approve of your becoming. You are broadcasting it. Like a lighthouse, like a song with no need for chorus. Just rhythm, just tone, just truth. And the most sacred part? This frequency is not borrowed. It's not something you learned. It's something you remembered. You always knew how to hold it. Life just taught you to forget. But forgetting is not failure. It's just the beginning of remembering. And now, right now, your memory is returning. Not in thought, but in tone, in vibration, in the way your body feels when it stops pretending, in the way your energy settles when you stop narrating lack. This is the new baseline. You are no longer speaking to be heard. You are vibrating to be known. And the universe, finally, is listening. There is a certain stillness that arrives when you realize you are no longer chasing your life. You are emitting it. You are no longer trying to manifest outcomes through frantic action, but stabilizing identity through calm coherence. And in that realization, something ancient begins to exhale inside you. A part of your being, long burdened by performance, pressure, and proving, lays down its armor. It no longer needs to negotiate for peace. It no longer needs to earn alignment, because it has remembered its original role, to carry the signal of I am, not as a concept, but as a living pulse. And here's the most sacred part. You are not broadcasting this new frequency alone. Every time you speak from your deepest truth, You send ripples into the collective field. You become part of the tuning of humanity. You normalize wholeness. You anchor safety in authenticity. And that's not small, that's seismic. Most people think transformation must be loud, that it must disrupt, conquer, or command. But the field doesn't work through noise. It works through resonance. And resonance spreads best through subtlety, like scent on the wind, like light filtering into a dark room, like a whispered yes that echoes across timelines. You've become that whisper, that soft yes, that signal of possibility disguised as presence. And now, you're noticing how different life feels when you stop narrating it from lack. You're noticing how your body relaxes when you stop telling old stories as if they're contracts. You're noticing how space opens around you when you stop editing your identity to be palatable. This is the invisible architecture of sovereignty, not control over outcomes, but clarity within them. You no longer cling to things that collapse your signal. You no longer apologize for your alignment. You no longer disguise your light as humility. This isn't arrogance. This is coherence. And coherence is always quiet. Is the kind of quiet that doesn't need recognition to feel real. The kind of quiet that doesn't flinch when questioned. The kind of quiet that knows the universe doesn't speak in words. It speaks in match. When you become a match for the life you used to chase, you stop chasing. Not because you gave up, but because you arrived. You crossed the inner threshold. And what was once a dream is now a tone, a natural hum, a felt rhythm. The future is no longer an idea. It's an embodiment. An embodiment means you don't just know it, you are it. You don't just visualize ease, you move like ease. You don't just declare love, you listen like love. You don't just affirm safety, you breathe like someone who belongs. This is the full loop of vibrational mastery. When your identity becomes so consistent that it no longer requires language to hold shape. When people can feel who you are, not because you tell them, but because your presence speaks before you enter the room. And from here, reality bends gently. No explosions, no drama, just subtle rearrangements. Delays become divine timing. Detours become alignments. No becomes redirection. And all of it feels soft, not because it's easy, but because you've become unshakable. Because even when things wobble, your signal does not. Even when outcomes shift, your presence does not. You remain loyal to yourself, not through stubbornness, but through integration. That's the completion. Not the end of growth, but the end of fragmentation. You've become a singular signal, and singular signals are rare. They stand out, not through effort, but through clarity. They attract not by pulling, but by radiating. And they influence others, not by converting, but by being. You are now walking as that signal. Not always perfectly, but consistently enough that the field has adjusted. It no longer confuses your temporary moods with your identity. It no longer mirrors your moments of doubt as truth. It listens to your tone, not your spikes. Your baseline, not your bursts. Because your baseline is now clear. This is why. Things are moving faster. This is why people are shifting around you, some drawing closer, others drifting away. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your signal is no longer scrambled. And scrambled frequencies attract confusion. Clear frequencies attract precision. This is what you're feeling now. The precision of your own resonance, becoming a sorting mechanism for everything in your life. And the more you trust it, the less you need to force anything. The less you need to explain anything. The less you need to repeat. Lessons already integrated. You've become a new source. Point. And from this new source, new realities are born. Not manufactured, not pushed, but born naturally like fruit from a rooted tree. The tree doesn't rush its fruit. It doesn't beg the season to change. It simply remains aligned with its own nature and lets time do its sacred work. You are now that tree, rooted in coherence, anchored in truth, expanding without apology. And because of this, your timeline is now bending, not to punish the old you, but to reward the one who stayed long enough in discomfort to stabilize something new. That discomfort was not a sign of failure. It was the nervous system learning safety. It was your field reorienting. It was your subconscious releasing density. And now the weight has lessened, the static has quieted, and what remains is tone, signal, frequency. You are now walking as your future self, not perfectly, but clearly, not flawlessly, but fully. And the field recognizes it. It speaks back to you in events, in encounters, in synchronicities that don't need explanation. You know what they are. You feel what they are. They are echoes of the new signal, confirmations without fanfare. And all they ask is that you continue breathing from your center, continue speaking from alignment, continue honoring your I am, not as a spell, but as a sacred vibration. Because in the quantum realm, identity is not static. It's a frequency in motion. And you are now living in motion without fragmentation, moving forward without collapsing inward, becoming without the exhaustion of becoming, just being, just broadcasting, just existing as the clearest signal in your own life. And the universe, soft, intelligent, responsive, is already adjusting. Because it always does. Because frequency is the first language. Because who you are is not what you say. What? You consistently vibrate. And you finally are vibrating home. And now you know, not just in thought, but in tone, that your I am was never just a phrase. It was a doorway. And you've walked through it. Not with fanfare, but with quiet return. The return to self. The return to the frequency that doesn't ask, doesn't perform, doesn't chase. The frequency that simply is. You didn't arrive here by chance. You attuned your way here, breath by breath, choice by choice. And from this stillness, everything softens. Not because life is easier, but because you've remembered how to carry yourself through it. This is coherence. This is the sacred ordinary, the space where nothing looks different on the surface, but everything feels different in your field. So when you rise, rise as the signal. When you speak, speak as the tuning fork. And when you pause, pause like someone who trusts what's already listening. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. Other stories are waiting. For you, frequencies disguised as words, ready to remind you of what you've never truly forgotten.